This is Math 3, 3.5 notes. That's Unit 3, Lesson 5. The title's Factor by Grouping. And don't forget your name, date, and period in the upper right-hand corner. We are going to be factoring today, and the new method we're learning is grouping. We're going to be factoring using the grouping method. And again, that is new to us this year. The first two are review. Number 1, factor xy plus 7y. All right, so again, this one is review, and I'm hoping that you recognize that this is a GCF type of factoring. There's two terms, they have a like term, they have a like factor, so it's a greatest common factor. The common factor is y, leaving behind x plus 7. Y times x is xy. Y times positive 7 is positive 7y. This here is my factored form. We don't take out a y squared. They both only have one y to the first power, so y is all that comes out times whatever's left over. All right, number 2, also review, is a review of something you did last year in Math 2, and we did it again in this year in Math 3. Okay, x times x plus 3 plus 7 times x plus 3. So there's two terms, just like there were over here. The first term over here had two factors, x and y. This one has two factors, x and x plus 3. The second term has multiple factors. This one was 7 and y. This one's 7 and x plus 3. So it's just like this one, only thing is the second factor is bigger. Here was y and y, here it's x plus 3 and x plus 3. But it's still the same process. There's two terms, they have a common factor. Your common factor is x plus 3. So you're going to GCF it just like we did the y over here, times, just like we did right there. And then what's left over? The x plus 7, because it's right there, x plus 7. Just like the x plus 7 was left over there, x plus 7 is left over here. Only thing is the chunky piece that came out was not a single little piece. It was a chunky piece of x plus 3 times. And it's not x plus 3 squared. Kids will often say, well, there's two of them, it's squared. No. Just like there was two y's, we only took out a y because they were both raised to the first power. That there is your answer. All right, now we're ready for the new ones. Number 3, 5x squared plus 15x plus 4xy plus 12y. And what's going on here is there are 4 terms. Whenever there are 4 terms, first thing you should do is look for a GCF on any factoring problem. 5 is not in common because 5 doesn't go into everything, nor does 4. Kids will say x. There's an x, there's an x, there's an x, but hey, that last guy does not have an x. These two guys don't have a y. So there is not a GCF. But when there's 4 terms and there's no GCF, you go straight to factor by grouping. 4 terms, factor by grouping. And I don't put parentheses, kids will, but I don't like to because when there's a minus sign, that throws things off. So you're going to think of that as its own problem and that as its own problem. So what you're going to do here is factor the GCF for just those 2 terms. And your GCF for just those 2 terms is 5x. 5x times what is x squared? X plus 5x times what is 15x? 3. And then what do you factor out here? That positive sign goes down, plus whatever that sign is here will always follow there. Plus, now we're going to cover this piece. What's coming out here? What's my GCF here? It looks like a 4y. And then 4y times what is 4xy? That would be x, plus 4y times what is 12y? That would be a 3. Now we look, what do they both have in common? An x plus 3, kind of like we had up here. So you take the x plus 3 out. Not x plus 3 squared because they're both raised to the first power. Once you take that out, you're left with 5x plus 4y. in parentheses. All this is being multiplied. That there is your beautiful final answer. X plus 3, 5x plus 4y. All right, number 4. 20 minus 16x minus 5x squared plus 4x cubed. Okay, 4 terms, which means factor by grouping. First thing you want to do, though, is always look for a GCF. There's no GCF here. 4 doesn't go to everything. They do not all have an X, so we're going to do factor by grouping. And you do factor by grouping like this. Group up your first 2 terms and GCF it. So I'm going to GCF. What goes into 20 and 16x? That is a 4. 4 times 5 is 20, minus 4 times 4x is 16x. Okay. Now remember what I said earlier, whatever your middle sign is, that's always going to be dropped down. So be careful with that. Over here, I was taking out a positive 4y, so I didn't have to do any special thinking or flipping signs. When you're factoring out a negative, it does change your signs, and here's why. We're not taking out just a negative, we're taking out a negative x, because they both have an x in common. Now this is, and that should be a squared, because that's an x squared, that's an x cubed. How many do they have in common? X squared. All right, now what's going to leave behind is a 5, a positive 5, because negative x squared times 5 is negative 5x squared, minus 4x, and that's where kids get confused. Why is that minus? It was plus there. The reason is I took out a negative. When I take out a negative, that second sign will always change, because a negative times a negative would give me a positive. Let's say this were a negative to begin with. Instead of a positive, it was negative. Then this would change to a positive, because a negative times a positive would give me that negative. So whenever there's a negative in the middle, you're factoring a negative out, which what something we did in our previous lesson, and it always changes that sign there. All right, because you're factoring out a negative. Now let's look at the big picture. Ta-da, it's all beautiful and nice, and look, again, now it's something similar to what we did up here. There's 2 terms. They have a common factor of 5 minus 4x. What's left over? 4 minus x squared. And you have one little small extra step. Remembering you factor completely. Even if it doesn't say completely, you're always going to factor completely. And 4 minus x squared is a difference of 2 squares. And what do I do there? This is going to stay 5 minus 4x. And it's difference of 2 squares. It's backwards, so you're going to factor backwards. 2 is going to go in the front. X and the x at the end. One's plus, one's minus, or minus plus, it doesn't matter. 2 times 2 is 4. X times x is x squared. You change your signs, and that's factored completely. Okay, before we move on, I'm going to put a little thinking bubble here about factoring out negatives. What happens if you factor out a negative? 7 minus x, if you pull a negative out to the front, it's going to make that negative x positive and that positive 7 negative. And that works anytime you have, let's say you had x minus 5. You'd pull out a negative, it would make that negative 5 positive and that x negative. So pulling out a negative pretty much flips what's on the inside. Do you see that? 7 minus x became x minus 7. Now if you were to distribute that negative, you'd get negative x plus 7, which is the same as that there. Negative 5 plus x, which is what we have there. Okay, so let's use that to do number 5. 7x, x minus 3 minus 2 parentheses 3 minus x. All right, this one's already part of the way factored for us. So the first step's already been done. It looks like this one up here. The only thing is, hey, wait a minute, those 2 guys are not the same. What do we do when those 2 guys are not the same? First, you check to see if they're opposites. If they are, you can factor out a negative. If they're not, then you're stuck and you can't go any further. But guess what? These guys are opposites. What I'm going to do right here, change colors. Right here, we're going to pull out a -1, just like I did over here in my thinking bubble. So 7x is going to stay. X minus 3 is going to stay. Because I'm pulling out a -1, I multiply it with the -2 and I get +2. If that were already a +2, then you'd end up with -2. You pretty much just multiply and changes the sign. -x becomes +x, +3 becomes -3, and ta-da, look how beautiful that is. They are now the same. All right, so when these two guys are opposites, like say this was x minus 5 and 5 minus x, y minus 2 and 2 minus y. You're always going to pull a negative. I typically pull it out of the second one. It doesn't matter, but it works nicer that way. You pull out the negative, change your sign there, and now you're ready to say, hey, they have a common factor of x minus 3, not x minus 3 squared, just an x minus 3, leaving behind a 7x plus 2, and you can't factor any further. That there is your final answer. All right, number 6, 8x minus 8 plus x to the third minus x to the fourth. All right, same thing we've been doing. We are going to first look if there's a GCF all the way through. There is not. So sometimes you do have to regroup. We haven't had to, and we probably won't have to anytime soon, but just know, heads up, there may come a time when you do have to regroup, and we'll deal with it when that time comes. All right, we're going to cover GCF. There is 8. I'm hoping everybody can see that. You're left with not just x, but x minus 1, because 8 times x is 8x. X times minus 1 is minus 8. Now remember what I said about this sign. This sign always drops. So plus, my GCF here is a what? X cubed. X cubed times what is x cubed? That's 1. X cubed times what is minus 4x, minus x to the fourth. It would be minus x. X cubed and negative x makes negative x to the fourth. Then you uncover, and oh no, we're very close, but this guy is not right. But it looks just like these guys over here, which is something we call as opposites. And remember what I said previously. If it's an opposite, you pull a negative out of the second one. It doesn't matter which one, but that one always works out nicer. First one will stay the same. Now I do that -1 with that positive x cubed, and now it's negative x cubed. Earlier it was already negative, and the two negatives made a positive. This one, the positive with the negative, made a minus. And then negative x becomes positive x, positive 1 becomes negative 1, and ta-da, it looks like it should. Take out an x minus 1, because that's what they have in common. Not an x minus 1 squared, just an x minus 1. What does that leave you with? 8 minus x cubed. Okay, now two things. We are going to do a number 7 when we get back into class, and you are not done with this problem. This here is a cubic, the SOAP problems. So go ahead and use your notes from last unit, factor that. I'll go over it with you in class, and then we will do number 7 as well. All right, that is it for now.